So I've got to meet Dusty Rhodes. Doug Dillinger doesn't know me yet, so he just looked at me this way. So I followed Doug Dillinger down this. You have to go down this little ramp, and then center stage, backstage is all these little rooms, and like a little hallway, and then little rooms off it. And I get led to the very end of this, and there's nobody there. There's nobody there, and I just get Doug Dillinger points into this one room, and I open the door, and I walk in, and in this little 12 by 12 room, in the middle of it, is sat in a chair with nothing else there, Dusty Rhodes, completely naked, except for a pair of cowboy boots on.
Oh my goodness.
And he's just sat there. Now, again, my wrestling education, this is where it all started tying together, was from the early 80s of getting Rings wrestling magazines. Well, Dusty Rhodes was always in them. For my art O-level, although I left school at 16, you still had to do exams. And there's two types of exams at the time. There's CSE, and then there's O-level. O-level was the highest. Some things I didn't care about at school. Art was one of the things that I did. My art O-level, I had to do a couple of pictures. One of them I did because I was such a wrestling fan. One of them I did of Fit Finlay, and one of them I did of Dusty Rhodes off a cover of whichever American wrestling magazine it was, just bleeding. And I had to draw it in pencil, and that was handed in as part of my O-level.
Right.
And that got me well, I don't know, because I'd left home before my exam results came. I'd already left home because
You're pretty invested.
moved to Blackpool, and I've still to this day have no idea whether I passed any of them or not. And kids, don't pay attention to me on this, but it never mattered to me one bit. I've got no idea what I did at school because I just did my exams and left home 6 weeks later. I worked for my dad for 6 weeks, saved enough money up to leave home, and then left home in the July of '84 and never went back, moved to Blackpool, and that was it. I became an apprentice wrestler. So I'm stood, and Dusty Rhodes is sat there. Now, I've watched a lot of Dusty's matches on tape at the time. I'm stood, and Dusty's sat there with nothing on. Well, he's got a pair of these glasses on and a pair of cowboy boots. And I've gone, Mr. Rhodes, Steve Regal, nice to meet you. And I handed him this letter, and Dusty had these papers, and he just looked up slowly like that, and he looked me up and down, took this letter off me. He read it, or he pretended to read it. I don't know. And he just went, Stephen. As he's saying that, Doug Dillinger walked behind him. So now Dusty Rhodes is sat there naked with a pair of cowboy boots on. And Doug Dillinger, who was a big, impressive fella, big, gruff-looking fella, he stood behind him, cross-armed, just staring at me. And I'm in a 12-foot by 12-foot room. And this man who I've watched a lot of and really, know that he's one of the greatest wrestlers ever and character, and watched his promos, and, because I could get tapes and stuff by then. I've seen all this stuff. Because the first wrestling I saw in 1985 was the NWA from Charlotte. My friend Peter, that's the tapes that he got. So, wow, it's a good introduction to American wrestling, right?
Sure.
I didn't see WrestleMania 1 till about 6 months after that. That's when we got, so that's how, it was weird, right? I was already wrestling, but first thing was the NWA. So Dusty Rhodes is sat there with Doug Dillinger behind him, and Dusty just took this letter, and I don't know what to do, because he sat there naked with this pair of cowboy boots on. And he just looked me up and down, and he went, Stephen, I'm just like Whitney Houston. I got my own bodyguard. And he pointed at Doug Dillinger. And he handed me the letter back. And then he just put his head back into his papers and was either reading them or pretending to. And I just stood there for about 30 seconds, which felt like an hour. And I just went, okay, thank you. And I just walked out the room. So that was my introduction to Dusty Rhodes. Complete an utter silence. Well, just a weird situation with him naked talking to me like that. So I walked out in a bit of a daze, not knowing like, what is going on?
Sure.
And I've walked into the dress. He said, somebody else said, oh, there was all kinds of dressing rooms, but the main one's there.